This video was made possible thanks to my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi.
So you might have heard recently that a certain someone named Javier Milei placed first in the primary elections in Argentina, which are known here as the PASO. Milei is, to put it lightly, a very dumb far-righter who has this sort of like aesthetic trappings of Trump or Bolsonaro, while also being very socially awkward and very uncomfortable to watch, and also having certain views that even make those two look sort of normal in comparison. He is an anarcho-capitalist who believes in your right to sell your organs on the free market. So when I say anarcho-capitalist, I mean like actual anarcho-capitalist. Like he's dressed up as like a black and yellow anarcho-capitalist superhero in the past. So, yeah. So before moving on, let me first explain what these PASO elections actually are. They are basically like an official primary run by the state rather than by the parties themselves. It's kind of weird, but it's how Argentina does things. And every party or coalition of parties has candidates who run in these primaries in order to decide who will be the presidential candidate, and it also decides who will actually be on the ballot, because you need to get at least 1.5% of the vote in the PASO in order for your party to actually show up on the ballot for the presidential election. So that's basically what the purpose of these primaries is. And Javier Milei came first in these primaries with his La Libertad Avanza party, meaning Freedom Advances, getting about 30% of the vote, ahead of Cambiemos in second place, who finished with a total of 28% split between their two candidates. They're sort of the generic right-wing neoliberals, and the Peronist coalition in second place, who are basically like sort of center-left to center, also mostly neoliberals. And they got about 26-27% between their two candidates. So what does this actually mean? Does this mean that Javier Milei is basically a shoo-in to win the presidential elections, which will be taking place next month on the 22nd of October, with a second round taking place in November if no one gets above the threshold to win the first round? In order to win the first round, the candidate needs to finish first with at least 45% of the total votes, or above 40% with at least 10% more of the total vote than the second place candidate. Otherwise, it goes to a second round between the top two candidates. So what do I think that Milei coming first in the primaries actually means? Does he have a chance of winning? He does, though I don't think it's as bad as many people are kind of saying. I think it's quite likely that he's going to make it into the second round, though not 100%, because there's just not really much separating the top three parties, and I think it's all going to come down to the campaign up until the October first round election. I think the most likely scenario is probably going to be Milei against a candidate from Cambiemos, who, as I said, are the sort of right neoliberal party, which is going to be Patricia Bullrich, who, surprisingly for me at least, beat Horacio Rodriguez Larreta, who is the mayor of Buenos Aires. So Bullrich is basically like a generic sort of right-wing neoliberal. I'd say she's sort of like a Mitt Romney sort of type in the US, to give you an example. And her big thing is basically calling for like tough on crime sort of stuff. And the Peronist candidate is Sergio Massa, who is like basically a right-wing Peronist. He is, you know, the worst candidate they really could have chosen, but he's the one they went with. He's the one who had all the institutional support, and really like trying to find differences between him and Bullrich is actually kind of difficult. I mean, obviously they're not exactly the same, but he doesn't exactly inspire anyone to go down to the polls, if you know what I mean. So overall, it's a really terrible field. Argentina has been in a very long-term economic crisis for about at least 5 or 6 years now. It's been getting worse and worse, and no one's really done anything about it. You had a government of Cambiemos, aka the right neoliberals, led by Mauricio Macri, which is when the crisis began, with him taking out a $50 billion IMF loan during his presidency. And then after that, we had a Peronist government led by the thoroughly uninspiring Alberto Fernandez, who then proceeded to be utterly incapable of dealing with the debt that Macri had taken on. And really the nail in the coffin for them was probably the pandemic, which they didn't really do a great job of managing. And ever since then, things have basically been going from bad to worse, which has opened up the space more to third-party candidates than ever in recent history. And that brings us to Milei again. Now, Milei is basically a creation of the Argentine right-wing media. And also some of the sort of Peronist media are guilty of giving him a platform and popularizing him as well, because they like to bring you onto their shows to debate him. For as long as I've lived in Argentina, which is 5 years now, he's been on the TV basically every second night. They give him they give him space on the air to propose utterly like ridiculous ideas like abolishing the central bank, which according to him is going to fix everything, abolishing basically every single government ministry, abolishing public services in pretty much every single way possible. You know, he at least rhetorically, he's like an anarcho-capitalist, an actual anarcho-capitalist, though in practice I seriously doubt he will be one, because how does that even work? And they bring him on TV to say the sort of stuff that you'd see like a 12-year-old libertarian kid on Reddit say. And they've done it for like 5 years now. And they've basically helped him along the way to build a profile and make himself into a real political contender and sort of frame himself as like an alternative to the two sort of main blocks, with the generic right-wing neoliberals and the Peronists, who are sort of a mix of neoliberals and social democrats. And with the country in such a sorry state now, it has worked. And no one else has really run as sort of an independent or like with a new political force to really sort of fill that gap that there is. So basically, people were exposed to this sort of third-party candidate who's framing himself as different to everything else, to other parties whose failures are what got us into this mess in the first place. And no one else has really done that at all. In Argentina, you have the sort of Trotskyist electoral left, who usually get like 2-3% of the vote. They're not very much of a force. No one takes them seriously. Their proposals are ridiculous. Like their most recent proposal was like just raise the minimum wage to $1,000 a month, which, to be fair, isn't any less than Milei's ridiculous ideas. But, people have never heard of Milei's ridiculous ideas before, right? Like, you can tell someone, oh, let's just raise the minimum wage like to a ridiculously high amount. And the average person will be like, wait, that sounds really stupid. You tell them to abolish the central bank. They don't even know what the central bank is. So it sounds slightly less stupid to them. It sounds, maybe it's something that they can believe, provided it's said with enough confidence. And, given that this guy has been basically created by the right-wing media and given the space that he needs to become what he is today, it doesn't really surprise me one bit that this is what ended up happening. Aside from that, the only other real sort of independent, sort of new anti-establishment seeming candidates, there was only one, Juan Grabois, who is a sort of Peronist activist, and unfortunately he's a Peronist, right? So he decided to run with the Peronist coalition rather than independently, and predictably he just got crushed by the establishment candidate Sergio Massa in the primaries. He was never really gonna be able to do anything. But he did actually have good proposals. That's something that everyone else sort of lacks. That's something that Milei actually has, right? He is like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. What the sort of current governing coalition, the Peronists and the neoliberals have, is nothing. They don't have policies. They have sort of vague platitudes because they don't want to commit to anything, because no one knows how to fix the crisis, and they don't want to outright say that. So they were obviously completely uninspiring, and they left a gap for someone like Milei to step into, which he has stepped into to great effect. And there's unfortunately no one else who had the same sort of profile or the same media backing to really do what he did. Just like many other countries, Argentina has a media that is largely owned and funded by, rich millionaires, billionaires, etc., which naturally skews very right-wing, which allows someone like Milei to get to where he is. And that's really what just has happened here. The perfect blend of sort of a media monster creating like this far-right figure with complete ineptitude on the part of the two main political blocs, resulting in a seemingly never-ending crisis that no one has any idea how to deal with. And this guy comes along and he's like, I'm going to fix this crisis by basically doing shit that has never been done, and obviously is not going to work, like abolishing the central. He wants to abolish the central bank, for example, when ever has that resulted in success anywhere in the world? It hasn't. It's not a thing that has ever happened. And it's especially funny because he also wants to dollarize the economy. He wants to abolish the peso and make Argentina's official currency the US dollar. So if you think for a second here, and you think, so he's going to abolish the central bank, he's going to adopt the dollar. What does that mean? It means that the Central Bank of Argentina is going to be the USA's central bank. That's what it means. So he's not actually abolishing central banking. What he's doing is making Argentina beholden to the US central bank. He basically wants to sell his country off to the US. He wants the US to control it. He basically has every right-wing position you could imagine. He's very contradictory as well. He's abolished the central bank thing, and he's an admirer of the so-called Peronist President Carlos Menem, who in the 1990s became incredibly popular due to his policy of fixing the exchange rate of the dollar to the peso at a 1-to-1 rate, which was good for like 3 or 4 years, and then all came crashing down in 2001 after his presidency, because that's a very expensive thing to do. You have to have dollars if you want to be able to convert them. You have to have lots of dollars on hand if you want to be able to convert them into pesos, which he had to take out lots of foreign debt to be able to do, because he had to buy dollars, and it didn't end up very well. So Milei, the guy who wants to abolish the central bank, right? He's an admirer of Menem. The guy who use the central bank to implement that policy. Does that make any sense to you? It doesn't. It doesn't make any sense, right? He's an admirer of Trump, of Bolsonaro. Those guys are not exactly libertarians. They're not exactly like against the state, at least not in the same way that Milei sort of claims to be. So when it really comes down to it, Javier Milei is just a far-right guy who just takes on sort of every single far-right position you could ever imagine, often contradictory positions, and espouses them, and that's really the way that I would describe him. I think he's just a guy who was propped up by the media in order to serve the interests of the rich who own the media, and that's what he's going to do when he's in office. He's probably not going to do anywhere near the level of the things that he says to do, that he said he's going to do against the state, because obviously the rich need the state to protect their interests. He's probably just going to be a bit more of a far-right neoliberal than the already far-right neoliberal party has been. But as I said earlier, it's hardly a given that he's going to win the elections, especially because when you look at the actual totals, he got 30% of the vote, right? Meaning that 70% of the vote went to other parties. Meaning that it's possible that that is sort of representative of what his voting base is going to be, and the anti-Milei vote may end up screwing him over if he does make the second round, because honestly, Patricia Bullrich is a terrifying prospect to have as the Argentine president, but you'd still want to vote for her against Javier Milei, because Jesus Christ, man. What is going on here? That's not a phrase I ever thought I would utter, Jesus. So basically, to summarize, Javier Milei is this generic far-right guy who says really dumb stuff that sounds good to people who have the interest that that sort of dumb stuff would serve, or to very stupid people, or to lots of poor people, actually. Lots of poor people who don't really have the time to think very deeply about politics, and who see nothing but their lives sort of crashing down around them due to the economic crisis in Argentina, and who just see someone who claims to have solutions to all of those problems, and they're like, well, can't be fucking worse than what's already happening to us, can it? And I can sort of see where they're coming from. You know, it's not the fault of the people, of at least a lot of the people who voted for Milei, because he did get quite a bit of votes from poor people. It's the fault of the rest of the Argentine political class for being so hilariously inept that they allow the rise of someone like Milei. And I don't know. I think what's going to happen is most likely Milei will lose in the second round to Bullrich probably, or perhaps to Massa. He might also not even make it to the second round. That is possible given how close PASO was. PASO is also not particularly an indication of how the presidential election is going to go. For example, in 2015, the Peronist candidate, Daniel Scioli, got 38% of the vote in PASO, while Mauricio Macri, the right neoliberal candidate, got 24%, and Macri ended up beating Scioli in the second round of the election. So personally, I wouldn't put too much weight on it, though it is very scary because Milei certainly won way more of the vote than I expected and what I would have liked. Basically, everyone who I know is very, very worried about this. Lots of people thinking about leaving the country due to this if he wins. But I will say that I don't think he's going to win, though obviously it is possible. I think the most likely scenario, as I said, Milei versus someone else in the second round, and the other party will beat him just because of the anti-Milei votes. Or perhaps he won't even make the second round, though I think that is sort of unlikely. Or if Milei does win, which is an absolute nightmare scenario, in Argentina you get your seats in the Congress based on the percentage of the vote that you got in the first round of the elections. So say he gets 30% there, in line with the vote that he got for his party specifically in PASO, he's only going to have 30% of the Congress. He's going to need to compromise, or perhaps he'll even just be blocked by the other parties in there, though unfortunately the right neoliberals will probably enable him quite a bit. So he's not going to have like absolute power or anything to do most of the insane stuff that he says he wants to do. He's not going to be able to do, obviously, unless he gets backing from the right neoliberals. And there's some things I think they will back him on, there's some things I think they won't, like abolishing the central bank, for example. They probably won't be too happy about that. So yeah, that's basically my offhanded analysis of Javier Milei, why this happened, what this means for Argentina. I think regardless of if he actually wins the election or not, it's going to be a rough 4 years, you know, no matter who's in power, because I can't tell you how this crisis can be dealt with. I can't tell you how it can be fixed. It's super painful to me to see, you know, everyone I know suffering constantly due to it, and Milei is certainly not going to fix it if he's elected, but also I don't think anyone else who gets elected is going to be able to fix it, though they won't make things as bad as he would. And then in 4 years' time, he's still going to be there. He's still going to be there for the next election. Anger will have risen to a fever pitch even more than ever before. And I think Milei is more of a danger in 4 years. Or Milei or his followers, someone else like him from his party, someone who takes on the rhetoric that he does. In 4 years, they're going to be more dangerous than they are now. And all I can say is I hope something changes between now and then, though I don't know what that could be. And that is terrifying. So yeah, that's my depressing analysis of the Argentine primaries and the elections to come next month. Keep an eye on them and send us your thoughts and prayers.
Thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi who make these videos possible, and especially my $25 plus supporters, Qualia, RS, Milton Friedman, Stephen Jordan, Ting Ting, Exos, Robokami, Arthur C. Mac Jones, William Tomlinson, Aizmalad, Brosnan, Mishif and Fins, Potte, Jel Cribson, and my $10 plus supporters, Big Man, Sir Splendid, Jack Paul, Max Halland, Ant, Minijan, Professional Tanky, Happy Nephron, Firefox42, Johnny Rocket, B, Nibiru, Ugopnik, Justin Bailey 77, XXXX, Can't Care Less, Melissa Gomez, Leaf Fiorine, JG, and Wesley Potts. Thanks for watching. See you next time.